All right, good morning, well, good afternoon. Thank you everybody to being with us today and to listen this important information that we have for you guys. And we have with us Miss Karen and Allison talking to us about partnering with 504 and IEP teams for successful student outcomes. So it's a great presentation. Thank you guys for being with us today. But before we start our presentation, I wanted to talk to you guys about Partner Resource Network. So Partner Resource Network is the parent training and information centers for Texas. And we are funded by the Department of Education, specifically the Office of Special Education. And we provide free resources and information for parents of children with disabilities and youth with disabilities that we call them self-advocates. Our mission is to empower and support the Texas families and individuals impacted with disabilities. Again, we serve parents of children with disabilities and youth with disabilities from the ages from 0 to 26. And we have 4 projects serving Texas parents. Since 2020, we add a new project. So we are PACT team, PEN and PACT, but we all the same family of Partner Resource Network. I personally, I'm Veronica Alvarez, and I'm in the team project. As you can see in the map, I'm in the red area. I'm in Austin. I support the parents in the Austin area. So we do a lot of, our services are free, and we do workshops, webinars, information and referrals, one-on-one technical assistance. We help you guys with the IEP meetings, ARD meetings. We do once a year a symposium. We also do parent leadership training and youth leadership trainings. So for today, if you have a question, please type it in the chat box or in the Q&A. Right now, your mic and your camera is off. So please type your question if you have any time. If we don't know the answers, later on we can email you the answer. This presentation is being recorded, and later we are going to post it in our Facebook pages, and also Allison with Consolidated Planning Group has a YouTube channel, and she also shared all these wonderful webinars that we've been doing since last year. I think it's going to be 1.5 years that we are working with Consolidated Planning Group. So thank you, Allison. So at the end of this presentation, you are going to receive a link with an evaluation. Please help us with your honest feedback. We really use that information to report to our grant and continue having these free trainings and resources for you guys. And we do not make any CEUs for you, but we can do a certificate of attendance. If you need one, please put it in the chat box or email me, and we can do that for you. And again, my name is Veronica Alvarez, and there you can see my contact information, my new email. Please visit our website, www.prntexas.org. We have a lot of information about our events, webinars, fact sheets, information, everything related to disabilities, special education. You will find it in there. So I'm going to stop my screen share. And now Allison is going to share hers, and she's going to introduce Miss Karen and the presentation of today. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Veronica, for having us again. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and it is a pleasure to have Karen Mayer Cunningham with us, and to be back with her. I think it's been a while since we've been together, Karen. So this is a different topic than what we normally talk about. So we're happy to be talking about this today. So I'm Allison Skalberg, Consolidated Planning Group. If you guys have attended these webinars before with Miss Veronica, you have seen my face before. Sorry for that. But we are, so we put out a series of webinars. We're a Consolidated Planning Group is a holistic special needs financial planning firm. We really help families that are transitioning their kids to adulthood, transitioning. There's a lot of different types of transitioning that we help families with. So we spend a lot of time, talking about the things that matter. We're National Social Security advisors, having money in the right buckets, knowing when and how to apply, how to pull the trigger on things, how to not mess things up after you have pulled the trigger on those types of things. So we do a lot of talks on that. And as she mentioned, we do have a YouTube channel. It's in the chat box. We'll share it again later. And I know that Karen has a lot of social media as well. She's like really great at that. She's got a lot of content out there as well. So Karen is a fabulous speaker. She knows her stuff backwards and forwards, and it is truly my pleasure to have her here today and speaking with us. I'm going to kind of just jump through a couple of my slides. If you've attended before, you know a little bit more about what we do, and you know that I always have these long list of things that should be on your special needs planning radar. So we're going to kind of skip over those today. They're all on our YouTube channel, and we're going to dive right in to Miss Karen. Karen, thank you. As always, you look lovely.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Veronica and Allison, for having me. It's a pleasure. Our heart at Special Education Academy is to serve others. And if we haven't met, I'm Karen Mayer Cunningham. I'm a special education boss, and we help everyone who sits at the 504 IEP table for successful student outcomes. There is just one table. There's only one side of the table, and that side is for helping educating a child with a disability. And so today we're going to talk about successful IEP 504 outcomes while you partner with the school. And first, I just want to say welcome, and you are your student's expert. The actual federal law says the parent is the expert. And I know this space, special education and or 504 and or those services that are provided can be a little ominous and intimidating. We use language in special education that kind of is not language that parents use. And sometimes we're confused about the process and really what's the benefit, right? As I always say to my clients or teams that I work with, what is the why? And the why is to identify the difference, right? The disability, and look at the appropriate way to mitigate it, measure it, support it, remediate it, or teach that child strategies to self-manage their disability. And so it's not bad news. Nobody's broken. Your kids are fantastic. But it's something that you can access for your child to be successful in school. And it's very different than what we had growing up. It's not some room down the hall, or it's not punitive, but it's about teaching our children strategies to self-manage their disability so that they can have success as adults, so that they can have gainful employment, independent or supported living, and further education. And so I'm going to walk through some slides. The first thing that we have to talk about is, when did you notice that something was different? Our one goal is successful student outcomes. And so to do that, we've got to jump in and be really honest about where our kids are. And so as the parents, we have the most information about our kiddos. So the beginning is, when did you notice something was different? And when they're little, it's kind of hard to tell, right? It's not like you have a 2-year-old writing and doing a 5-page writing essay. And often we say things when our kids are little, like, that's boys, or it was COVID, or he was never in daycare. But I think as parents, we obviously know the differences that our child might have functionally, behaviorally, academically, socially, and communicative. And we have to kind of lean into that and see what's going on. The great news is that if your child has a need for special education, and has a speech impairment, they can begin special education services in the public school as early as the age of 3. However, all of those services are driven upon evaluations. And sometimes people are a little intimidated by the evaluation process. Who do I call? Do I call Veronica? Do I call Allison? Do I call the superintendent? And so what you do is, whatever school district that you live at, if you have never had a child enrolled in that school district, I would certainly call the administration level and ask, who does testing for children with suspected need as it relates to a disability prior to the age of 3? And that might be at a specific campus. It might be housed at admin. It might be housed somewhere else. It might be housed at the campus that you're zoned to, but I would find out then. here's the most important thing. If you don't hear anything else today, you will not get time back. You won't get time back. There's never anything more important than intervening, whatever the need is, as quickly as possible. And so when we talk about looking at testing, it's not about, do we do this and then do this and then build? We test to identify what's going on, right? And the great thing about testing is it does one of two things, right? It either identifies or it eliminates. And that is how we respond, by getting your child tested. And when we get your child tested to identify disability, it's either going to identify or eliminate. And so let's go back to that previous slide where it says getting your child identified with a disability. So when we refer our student for testing in special education, we often go to seminars and webinars, and there's this very long legal letter that you're going to send the school. I'm really simple. I think it's much simpler than that. And as I train people, this is the email, simple email that you would send. Dear staff, this is my formal request for Billy Smith to have special education testing. Areas of suspected disability are attention and learning issues. And if there's something more specific that you know that's going on, it might be a sensory disability, deaf or hard of hearing, vision impairment, a need for occupational therapy, maybe a speech impairment. You could list that there. So you want to list the area of suspected disability, right? So I always just say learning issues and attention issues. Please let me know when I may come in and sign notice and consent. So notice and consent simply means that the school-based members are going to provide you notification that we're going to assess your student, right? And then you sign that you give them consent. Special education testing is consensual. It's not a hostage situation. You have to provide the school district consent to do those tests. We want the testing to be robust. And what I mean by that is the F in full and individual. The F still stands for full and full and individualized evaluation. Often I have families that come to me and they possibly didn't have the right language. And when they went to the school, they come back with a note that says, we're going to do a screener for dyslexia and consideration of a 504. While there's nothing wrong with that, that might not be the level of need that your student has. We don't know what your student needs until we do full and individualized evaluation. In the couple of decades that I've done this, I truly could count on one hand the students that I've served that have really just needed a 504, right? So the initial criteria for both of them is equal, right? Is there a disability, right? So for a 504, and you should know that a 504 is a civil right. It's a civil rights section. We have over time captured a lot of kiddos that have an educational need at school and are impacted by disabilities. But the difference is that a 504 is a student has an identified disability, right? And they're in need of some supports that may look like medical care, possibly a behavior plan, and then a series of accommodations. And a special education plan, which is called an IEP, is an individualized education program. And that entails a student that has a disability, right? And we can stay on the full individualized evaluation slide. But those two things tease that out, right? That I have a disability and that I'm in need of specialized instruction. We call it SDI, specially designed instruction. So that program, that documentation is going to be very, very robust to identify the student's disability and their unique needs, right? It will have goals, it will have accommodations, it'll have support time for that student, and related and or instructional services. So there are two different products that serve a student in a school with a disability. The good part of a full individualized evaluation is it does one of two things, right? It identifies or eliminates. And it's going to tease out your student's level of need. And then we'll know as a school and parents what level of need that student needs to be successful. So next, we're identifying the impact of your child's disability, right? We're identifying the impact of your child's disability. That's on the next slide. And what we mean by that is how does my child's disability impact him in school? And I think that people often get confused with, is there an academic need or there's not an academic need? Or often I'll hear from schools, you know, Billy didn't have to go to the principal's office. Well, going to the principal's office is not a need or a need for special education. We look at a child, is there an educational need? And so when we're talking about an educational need, we're talking about all of those impacts at school, right? Behavior, function, communicative, academic, social appropriateness. So you could have a child's IEP document and the impact of their disability doesn't present academically, but it certainly presents psychologically. It doesn't present academically, but it presents functionally. And so I want to caution you on looking to see if my kid has an academic need, because many of my kiddos that I serve have an educational need that doesn't revolve around goals, supports, or services as it relates to an academic expectation or outcome, right? So let's go to the next slide. So you're going to have 3 outcomes, right? Outcome number 1, your child does not have a disability that needs additional support. So what does that mean, Karen? I could have a child with a disability, but there's no educational impact. So write that down. There's no educational impact. My student has ADHD. He may or may not be medicated, and neither one of those are things that you would be required to do as a parent. That's certainly a personal decision. But my student has an identified disability, and there's not an impact at school that needs additional support, whether it be a 504 with accommodations or an individualized education program with support services and goals that we're working on. So that's outcome 1. And these 3 outcomes will be identified at the conclusion of the evaluation, right? And so number 2, the second outcome, your child does have a disability that needs additional support at school that rises to the level of a 504. Again, a 504 is a document that we are going to capture the student's identified disability, how it impacts him at school, the educational need, and what supports that we can put around that as it relates to accommodations. We could have psych services, we could have medical needs, and depending on the acuity of the disability, there might even be a need for a behavior intervention plan. So that's outcome number 2. And then outcome number 3 is going to be your child does have a disability that needs additional support at school called an IEP. Now, all of these are good news. And the reason they're good news is because we've identified the need. There's nothing worse than as parents or as educators to know there's something off and we've not identified the need. And so when we've identified the need, we're going to work with the school to develop, and we're going to focus mainly on outcome number 3. Again, a 504 plan is going to be a lower level of support. There's nothing tracked in the 504. We're not measuring goals, but we're certainly putting these supports in place as it relates to accommodations and maybe behavioral plan so that that student could be successful. Again, a 504 or an IEP is something above what other students are receiving from the general education teacher. One is not better than the other. I think it's very important to know that kids with disabilities don't have labels. Packages have labels. Children have eligibilities that drive needs and supports and services. When you're doing the evaluation, you want to make sure that we are testing in all areas. And the law says that we test in all areas of suspected disability. Often when we meet with the evaluators and talk about those suspected disabilities, we might just say, Billy is struggling with reading. Billy is struggling with reading. Billy is struggling with reading. And we have a tendency as parents to know these words, like maybe we know the word dyslexia, or maybe his uncle has dyslexia. And that very much is true, but you want to make sure that you're not missing some area because it looks like reading. Often my kiddos that have a behavioral need actually are identified with a specific learning disability. Additionally, I have kiddos that have specific learning disabilities, and they additionally have ADHD and attentive. So when we're doing those evaluations, I want you to give grace to the school because those evaluations do take 45 school days. That's 9 weeks We need that time to properly assess your student. There are many people on the multidisciplinary team. We want to give that team the opportunity to do that testing with fidelity, and it takes a while. So don't be impatient. I know that you want something quickly to service your kiddo, but if you need to do that, you can certainly look at putting a 504 in place while you wait for the results of the IEP to be returned. Okay. So eligibility. So when we look at eligibility, this last one, we're going to develop a complete individualized education program, an IEP. In Texas, we call it an ARD document, and which stands for admission, review, and dismissal, which are one of this, what we're doing at any point in the student special ed process, because we're either admitting them into special education, it would be initial provision of services. We're reviewing it for the totality of time or years that student is in special education. And depending on when there's no more need for special education or the student graduates, then we would be dismissing them. Okay. So I kind of break it down into 5 pillars of the IEP document. Certainly there's more components than that, but I think that's a good starting place for families to kind of look at the pillars that we build the individualized education program on. On the next slide, pillar 1, this is a lot of big words. On pillar 1, it's present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. It's a PLAF, right? And so it's a big fancy acronym, and it just basically stands for how does the student's disability impact him across settings? So in those present levels of academic achievement and functional performance, we're going to have input from everybody, right? We're going to have input from the parents. The law says that we put in parent concerns for educating their student into those present levels. We're going to have the teachers that serve that student and talk about, for instance, if a student has autism, how does his autism impact him in language arts, right? And how does his autism impact him in science? It may not appear to impact him in science because he loves that. It might greatly impact him in language arts because it's really a struggle for him to still himself and to get down a written product. And so we look at how it impacts him across all of those settings so that we can build a program, an individualized education program, to address his unique needs. So the PLAF should be the largest section of the IEP. So I always say your PLAF should be puffy, right? Often I get PLAFs and they have great analytical information and state testing and grades, but it doesn't really tell me about that kiddo. I should be able to pick up your present levels of academic achievement, read it, stand at the back of the math class and go, oh, that's Billy, because that's how robust the present levels are. We want that so we can say, hey, this is going on. We've addressed it. And so over the years, we can say, look, this is how we've made progress because our intervention have mitigated the impact of the student's disability in those settings. Okay. So all the teachers will have input, the coaches, whoever serves that student, right? Next, annual goals. The annual goals are those critical areas of need that we've identified a deficit that we're going to work on with a special education teacher, a general education teacher, and or related and instructional service providers to mitigate the impact of the disability and the characteristics of that. So the annual goals are not just academic goals, right? We can have behavioral goals, and behavior is not a bad word. We all have behaviors. And so the law says that we're looking at, does the student's behavior impact his learning and or the learning of others? And so as it relates to behavior, we might have a behavior need that can be addressed simply through an accommodation, an IEP, an accommodation and a behavior goal, or we might rise to a higher level to meet an annual goal that additionally sets alongside of a behavior intervention plan. And we do not have a goal for every single topic in school. We want teachers to teach. We don't want them to walk around with a clipboard. But those areas that are critical that we need to address and provide special education services and supports around those, we do write annual goals for that. So academic, behavioral, functional. What are functional goals, Karen? That could be simply, getting yourself dressed, being able to use, your supplies correctly, those functional needs as it relates to being in school. Are you able to feed yourself? Do you need help with those sorts of things? Emotional, behavioral goals. You might have goals around counseling services. You might have goals around social skills. You might have goals around your communicative needs as it relates to a speech impairment. And so there's a number of different types of goals you could have. You additionally would have goals around related and or instructional services, such as, but not limited to, Braille, if you had an interpreter, orientation and mobility, counseling as a related services, physical therapy, occupational therapy, music therapy. There are quite a bit of them. And so those would additionally have either a standalone goal or they would be attached to one of those other goals. And those general ed and special ed teachers and those instructional or related service providers would work on them together. So those are annual goals that the student in special education would work on. I want you to note that special education is a service. It is not a location. Let me say that again. Special education is a service. It's not a location. So it doesn't mean that you have to go somewhere specific to receive those services. Pillar number 3, needed accommodation. So what's an accommodation? Well, accommodation is a civil right. Right now I'm being accommodated. I am sitting in this chair. I could stand up and give this information, but I'm sitting. So an accommodation changes how I learn, right? Or how the instruction is being given or how the student has access. A modification changes what I'm learning. But for sure, a student is going to need accommodations. And what does that mean? We know that without this accommodation that Billy is not going to be successful on this reading goal. An accommodation might be check for understanding by having the student repeat the directive. Maybe the student hears the directive and gets going and uses the wrong operation to do his math facts, right? So we would add that accommodation to that math goal, which would be check for understanding by having student repeat the directive. So Billy, tell me what you heard me say. You just said, get to work as quickly as possible. No, that's not what I said, right? And so without those accommodations, we know that that student is not going to make expected progress on the IEP goals that we crafted. Accommodations, there are a million types of accommodations as it relates to environment, adapting the instruction, adapting expectation, assistive technology. I couldn't begin to even list all of them. I would gently recommend that you would try to have as few as possible, but only the ones that he needs to be successful. And then make sure that when you're writing them, that they're not duplicates. We don't write accommodations for something that we think they might need. We write accommodations for things that we need. We only educate based on data. And I know for parents and schools, we love these kiddos and sometimes we worry and sometimes we want to put stuff in the document just in case. We don't do just in case. We base our educational plan solely on one thing, data. We don't educate based on fear or worry. We educate based on data, rate of progress and expectation, okay? Pillar 4, where to implement the student's program, right? So an educational and individualized education program can be implemented anywhere. And what is the most appropriate place? And those are many factors we have to think about, right? So the LRE, which is the least restrictive environment, simply says that we educate students with disabilities to the maximum extent possible with their non-disabled peers, right? With supports and services. And when that doesn't work, we make adjustments. If it doesn't work, we don't just try something different, we make adjustments, right? If that still doesn't work, then we've got to come back to the table and look at, is there a more appropriate setting so that the student can make expected progress? And so those could be anything from general ed with accommodations, general ed with in-class support, general ed with a co-teacher in class, resource, which is a pull-out model where they're in a smaller setting to work on those foundational pieces that they're missing in a content area, but they're in a room with only disabled peers. There's no non-disabled peers. There are specific programs as it relates to behavioral needs, autism, those sorts of things. The regional day school for the deaf, there are certain specific settings that are just disabled peers. And then additionally, there is an alternate setting considered life skills, which is alternate from the general ed curriculum, and then resources and modification from the curriculum. And it's not all or nothing. It's not you're in or out. We look at it across content areas. I have kiddos that are in general ed. I have kiddos that are the same kiddo is also in resource for a different content area. And I have a kiddo that the same kiddo that is in life skills, maybe for a functional need during the day. So we look at it as a committee, and the committee are the parent, the LEA representative, and LEA simply stands for the local education agency. It's usually going to be the principal, a general ed teacher, a special education teacher, and then someone who understands assessment and is able to interpret them and answer questions about them. Those are considered the 5 stakeholders that make those decisions. Parents are equal team members as the school-based members. And so as we work together to talk about where can we implement this program, where can we work on his IEP goals as it relates to each content area, right? And then pillar number 5, the students required special education support time. And we call it the SOS page, the schedule of services page. And where are we going to schedule him for his services so he can get expected progress on his IEP goals, not more than he needs, not less than he needs, right? And that's based on all of that stuff that we were building, right? The present levels, the IEP goals, the accommodations, and talking about what that student's needs are. And we program for 36 instructional weeks, only 36 instructional weeks. We don't program for 2 or 3 years because we don't know. Kids are amazing, teachers are amazing, and parents are great. We don't know how quickly he'll progress, or maybe he won't progress as quickly as we anticipated. So we need to make those adjustments. And again, these are each content area. It's not a one and done, but we look at where is the appropriate place to implement those support services and times so that he can make expected progress. Schools need parents to partner with them. They just really do. Nobody knows more about their student than the parents. And so anything that the parent has that adds value to the IEP committee, which means it adds value to the student, bring that information to the school ahead of time. If you have outside services, I always have my parents bring a summary letter. Maybe you have ABA, maybe you have OT, any of those sorts of things. If you have a letter or updated testing from a physician or a neurologist or a psychiatrist, please bring those updated documents to the IEP team so that we can make completely informed decisions. We can only make informed decisions about the information that's provided. Additionally, school-based members, bring the information. It's not good information or bad information. It's just information. I always say that to get from 100 Elm to 100 Main, I got to put in that we were at 100 Elm. And so I think sometimes schools want to make it sound a little bit better for the parent than it is. And it's not about being better or not, but we need to know exactly where that student is functioning across those core content areas and what are his needs in any area as it relates to behavior, language, related services, social needs, and any of that. So please bring all of that information so that we can know how does that student's disability impact them across settings so that we can partner to work on teaching him strategies to mitigate that impact, right? And so when we have done all of that, then we will partner, then we will have it's called FAPE, a free appropriate public education. And so that one little letter that says A stands for appropriate. And so Karen, what does the word appropriate mean? Well, that's kind of a trick question, but appropriate is what is right for this student to make expected gains. It's not best, it's what's appropriate. And so that's what we are working to make sure that student has a robust IEP program with rigor, not to overwhelm the student, to make expected progress. And so when we get those pieces right, then we can know how to best serve those students. And so the outcomes drive any changes that we do. Kiddos are amazing, humans are amazing, but we have to always be looking at this program to see if it's right. Because we build the program for 36 instructional weeks, often schools and or parents have an understanding that that's just the way it is for 36 instructional weeks. And that's not true. If we started this plan in October of 2021, and we said, Billy is going to work on these goals and he's making progress that we weren't expected at a higher rate, then we come back and we make changes. When you get an individualized education program, you're going to get IEP progress reports. And so just like when your student gets a report card, you're additionally going to see documentation as it relates to those IEP annual goals that you wrote. So for instance, if he has an IEP goal in English and was supposed to be at 70% after 36 instructional weeks, and after the first grading period, which would be about 25% of the year, he's at 50% on that IEP goal, well, then we know that he's going to master that long before 36 instructional weeks. We might start an individualized education program and realize he needs an additional goal in this area, or he doesn't need that goal. He's surpassed that already. So we're always looking at it. So it's very important for parents and case managers or the IEP team to be looking at it each marking period. Is he on track for that expected rate of progress so we can make adjustments within that year? How often do you have an IEP meeting? You have an IEP meeting as often as needed. A lot of times, most of those meetings could just be parent conference meetings. And now that we're all in the world of Zoom, which I'm sure will be forever, it's much easier to set up parent conferences by Zoom or with the principal to work out those pieces. You only need to call an IEP meeting when you're considering making changes to the IEP document. And then once your child is in special education, we have to reassess. We're required to reassess at maximum at every 3 years. It's called a triennial. And it's really important, parents and schools, that we reassess. Why? Because kiddos change. Sometimes a kiddo no longer meets eligibility in that disability category, which is great news. Sometimes an additional disability is beginning to present. So most of our kiddos, a lot of our kiddos started special education when they were little guys, right? And so the assessments that I can give a 3-year-old or a 6-year-old are very limited versus the assessments that I could give a 10, 12, or 14-year-old. And so we ask for new assessments as a committee. We look at which of those areas do we need new assessments. We certainly don't have to do all new assessments, but we look at the ones that might have changed or moved so that we have correct information, right? Reassessment is to make sure, is there still a need for special education? Is there a need for change to a special education? Is there a need for new related and/or instructional services? And should the student continue to have a need for special education? And so my mission statement is, when we get it right for the child, we get it right for everybody. And the only way we get it right for the child is when we partner as a team, because we're all team kiddo. There's just one team, and it's the team for the child. And so that's how we partner with schools, and that's how schools partner with us for successful student outcomes for our kiddos. I know that's kind of a quick, broad overview, but special education is good news. I always tell people, it's whether it's a 504 special education, if your kiddo, played a sport and you got him a coach, you wouldn't have any, and you wouldn't be embarrassed about that or, be uncomfortable about it. It's just that kiddo needs something to excel in their sports that they're doing. And I consider special education that way. It's more coaching that these kiddos need to be successful in an educational setting. So if there's anything that we can do to serve you, certainly that's our information, admin at Special Education Academy. We're on all the social media platforms. We have tons of free content across those platforms: YouTube, TikTok, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And so we certainly want to open it up for questions so that we can address anything that might have come up during this meeting or other questions that you have. Be happy to answer those.
We have several questions, and I will be happy to read those to you. One that was a while ago, I'm kind of going back, of like, how do we kind of address the self-esteem of the individual that's going through this? Was a basic synopsis of the question. How are we addressing those needs?
When you see the self-esteem, do you mean the self-esteem of the student that's being tested? So, it depends. I mean, how old is that? I mean, there's a bunch of components to that question. Is it that the student's a little bit older and doesn't want to be tested? If a student has emotional needs, right, which would be your self-esteem would be impacted, I certainly would let them know this is just to get updated information, right? You're not in trouble, nothing went wrong. We're just doing this testing so that we can make sure, as I say, that we're drilling in the right place, that we're doing exactly what you need to be as successful as possible at school. That's what I would tell my student. And so
it was kind of a little bit further, like, do you have like suggestions, like, so for supporting a disabled child towards development of self-confidence?
Sure. So, I mean, as it relates to a special education, document. So you could be, whether you're in a 504 IEP, that kiddo could be, and we can put him in a social skills group. We could have counseling services, whether it's gen ed or special ed. We can have counseling as a related service, which is actually addressing the student's disability impact at school and gives them an ability to talk about that. Our kids do learn pretty quickly their differences, right? And so that's one of the things that we do in special education or 504 to address that need.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So we have one that says, what, according to you, needs to be the path for ensuring a professional future for students with health disabilities?
So when you say a professional, did you make it, Allison?
Yeah, it's a professional future. And I guess maybe I would take this and say that the Texas Workforce Commission has vocational rehab that partners. They have liaisons in all of the schools. Services are available for students ages 14 to 22, and they have them beyond 22. But as far as a professional future for your student with a disability, that vocational rehab program is really wonderful. They do assessments. They typically pay for those. They could be a neuropsych. They could be it is a vocational evaluation. And then what they do is they uncover the deficits that your student may have. And then they put I think it's called an IPE, but anyway, it's a plan. It's an employment plan, and it includes training and development and other things, skill building and things that they're going to provide for your student to help move them in that direction. They also work with the student in identifying what it is that they're interested in, and that plan is really tailored to them. So as it relates to that, that's what I would suggest there. And we do have a whole webinar on that topic. Karen, do you have anything that you would want to add to that?
Sure. And so that's a service that you can certainly access outside of the school district. So inside of your special education paperwork, federally at age 16, we have to do a supplement in your IEP document called a transition supplement. In Texas, we do it at 14. And what we're doing for those kiddos, which we should do for every kiddo, is that we should say, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? Which is great. We should be asking that for everybody. So Oregon, without exception or exemption, the Oregon Transition Handbook is the most amazing resource that I use to educate my parents. It gives you examples of IEP goals as it relates to transition, because our kids aren't going to evaporate. They're going to be adults before we know it. And so certainly I would have them partner with something, talking about what Allison talked about. But the school has an onus and a responsibility to build in a transition supplement that drives post-secondary goals, vocational goals, and based on those needs, it drives the supports that we do in the school. And so at minimum, I'm going to have a transition goal that says every grading period, Billy is going to come back to his case manager and deliver 2 brochures or printouts of places he would like to work or go to college as an adult. And then that case manager will work on probability, right? What does that cost to go there? Are you able to access it? What are the requirements? Right? We have so many programs for kiddos. We have the BASS program at HCC where Sue Maraska, who is amazing, does that, where you have to be able to read at a 3rd grade level. I sit on the board of Texas A&M University. We have a program there, the Bridge and the Path, and where kids can go to college for 4 years, whether they have an intellectual disability or autism. And so we have so many great programs, but you're going to have to partner with the school district and that there's a transition person over transition for your entire school district, I would partner with them to say, I want the most robust transition plan inside of my document, so that you use those 6 years so that we're tracking the right way. We're getting them in the right programs. I had a young lady that had an intellectual disability and she loved flowers. And the school district didn't want to put her in floral arrangement because she was concerned about her safety needs. She is now an adult working in the floral department of a grocery store, and she loves it. And so we had to push a little bit. But yes, that was a safety need, but then we're going to teach her safety expectations around using the glue gun and the pen, the pens and all of that. And she's doing exactly what she wants to do. So those are things where you partner with the school district so that I am ready to like any of our kids, we're transitioning them, right? We're getting them ready for the next steps as it relates to supported living, supported employment. And so they also are accessing ongoing education as well.
Karen, could you repeat the name of the guide that you said was really good? Veronica's going to put that in the chat box.
It's the Oregon Transition Resource Handbook. The Oregon Transition Resource Handbook. So amazing. It's just so amazing. I think it's over 100 pages long, and it really shows you how you walk this out. Because we kind of know a little bit about special ed when our kiddos are little, and unfortunately, our parents kind of step back a little bit. And sometimes the school, we kind of get a little comfortable in junior high and high school, which is really the time that we should be pushing in, right? Because you're going to be alive a lot longer than those 18 years you were in school, so that we get all access to all of those resources while we are in the school setting.
Where do they get that handbook? Is that like on the TEA website, or where would that handbook be?
Great internet. So you just type in.
Okay.
You just type in Oregon Transition Resource Handbook. I had the opportunity to do a seminar last year with Dr. Justin Porter.
I just Googled that and
you found it. Okay, thank you, Veronica.
Yeah, and there are some states that do things great. I mean, but Oregon does transition just amazing, and that will, because there's a lot for schools to do and teachers to do, and they have 8,000 other kiddos. So when you can come and say, hey, you know what, he really likes to do this. I had a kiddo the other day in transition. He goes, and we were asking what he wanted to do. He goes, I want to wear a uniform and I want it to be air conditioned. I was like, amen. That is so good. Mm-hmm. And then we ask these kiddos, what do you want to do instead of these cookie cutter things? Because sometimes parents don't know what the job opportunities are because we don't see them, right? I don't see that you could have been volunteering to read in an elementary school and supported without an income, right? There are many things that you can do, but unfortunately parents don't know what they are because they don't have another family with a child with that same kind of disability who's access that kind of employment.
So Karen, we have several more questions. So I'm going to just kind of go through them so we can get through as many as we can before our time is up. Basically, a parent wants to know what happens when raw data isn't provided for months, even though you've requested it. What happens when they're limiting the parent's ability to provide appropriate input or address significant issues, such as missed time and things like that? What do they do? How do they communicate? How do they get what they need?
Sure. So raw data data is the 4-letter word that we love in education, any kind of education. Without that data, we're all guessing, right? We're going off emotions and we're going off of kind of what we used to do. I have to have the raw data, not because somebody's in trouble or not in trouble, so we can see if that intervention was successful. Sometimes schools don't really understand when you ask for the raw data. So I would certainly do it in writing if you were not able to get that. If I was unable to still get it, I would do an open records request because that data has to be populated in the students' open records. If for still you're not able to partner with the school, unfortunately, and that your input is not equitable, because you're not just somebody giving input, you're actually the expert. In the federal code, the parent is the first person on the IEP committee. They're called stakeholders, right? We're talking about a child's destiny. It's kind of a big deal. And if that still is not happening, you might have to access, Texas has dispute resolution options. We have certainly trainings on that. There are 4 of them, right? A state written complaint, mediation, due process, and or U.S. Department of Education Office of Civil Rights complaint. certainly I
So
always
when you say put it in writing, it's okay if they send an email to the appropriate people from the IEP team as well as the principal. Is an email appropriate?
Yes, ma'am. So every student has a case manager or a SPED lead for the campus. And I would just say, this is my formal request to get a copy of Billy's raw data, raw data as it relates to his speech goals, his Braille goals, his language arts goal. Please let me know when I may pick that up by zip drive or photocopies. Thank you so much. And then that puts a timeline on it, right? When you put things in writing, it puts a timeline. If you're not getting a response, I always say to not respond is to yell. Then I would, if the school doesn't respond, certainly reach out to the special education director. And if that doesn't work, and it would be my position at that point that you would access your dispute resolution options in Texas.
Okay, thank you for that. Let's see. How can a parent? So I think it's kind of the similar thing. How can a parent determine if supports are appropriate if transparent data is not provided? It's pretty hard to do, right? So
well, here's how we know supports it is working. We've mitigated the impact of the disability, right? If it's working, the impact of the disability is mitigated, right? It's lessened. We've taught the child strategies. He's become more successful in that space. That's how we know.
Okay. What if progress reports show expected progress on goals, but yet educators say they cannot measure his progress due to compliance issues?
Right. So that is unfortunate. So we can always measure progress. I have a thing called a cell phone, and I can take a video of my kiddo reading. And often I ask the parents, when I get a family, I ask for two things. I ask for a 3-minute cold read, which is not by reading standards, and a 3-minute cold write. And it's quite simple. If the school district says my little Billy is reading at level J, I have the great teacher send a level J book home that he hasn't read. He's happy, he's had his snack, and I just ask him, hey, can you read this for 3 minutes for Miss Karen? And we do a video. During that watching of that reading video, I can see what's going on. Is it phonemic awareness? Is it basic reading? Is it fluency? Is it comprehension? Is he starting? Is he stopping? Is he looking for help? And that gives me information to take back to the team, because we're busy in schools. We are understaffed, right? And these kiddos' needs are the same before COVID and after COVID. So that's one way that I partner. Also a cold write is that I have Billy write for 3 minutes. I want you to write about your favorite things. So there's no cognitive load. I'm not asking him to make inferencing or poems or genres. And then when I see that 3-minute, I'll have the parent take a picture of the 3-minute cold write, and it tells me so much. Did he erase over and over and over and over again, right? Because teachers have so many kids to serve, sometimes it's hard to see your child's needs as it relates to all settings.
Okay, so from a timeline, we have about 5-ish minutes, and I think we have a lot more questions. What if the district mandates a read include cognitive testing to complete the other areas of concern? Cog testing would not have added services as student has OHI, other health impairment, and speech impairment.
So there's no mandate. So I really am concerned when parents are told there's a mandate. So initial testing requires that we do it in all areas. When we do a read, we decide as a committee, we're a team, what areas of testing would be meaningful, right? I don't want to expense the district. I don't want to wear out Billy. Why do you want the cognitive testing? Is he nonverbal? What benefit are you going to get from getting a cognitive test? And so testing is consensual. The only person that can deliver consent for testing are the parents. So there's no mandate. So be very careful when a school tells you you have to do this as it relates to special education testing. That is not accurate.
So this isn't really testing. The next question is, what do you do if they say the schedule of the classroom is already set for the child with an IEP? For example, we only teach in 10-minute rotations for the child on the IEP and other skills being taught, but parent says that the child can attend for longer than 10-minute spurts, but they're not honoring that. But the predetermined schedule requires the student switch every 10 minutes. How do you address that?
Right. So that sounds like, I mean, I'm guessing that sounds like that might be a certain program. Again, the classroom, The student doesn't adapt to the classroom. The education adapts to the student, right? So that is, we decide where's the most appropriate place to implement these IEPs. Maybe that classroom is not the most appropriate place to implement those IEPs. So it's not a, you get this and you get what you get and you can't throw a fit. If that's what the setting is, then I would argue that's not the most appropriate place to implement his IEP goals.
So we have another one that says, and I'm sorry, typically we don't say people's names just for privacy. Someone wanted their name said, but we typically don't do that just for privacy of everyone. Thank you for your explanation so far. Is it sufficient if the medical documentation in previous school documents is from a different country, however translated in English, in order to start an IEP so a faster and smooth start is possible? Is that possible, or is the testing going to be required to be done here by the school that they're in?
Sure. So two things. So the only place in the world that there is special education that's funded federally is America. And I have clients all over the world that have an IEP, but they really usually just hire a $50,000 parent to be with their kiddo. So if you have an IEP from the United States, then we do a transfer IEP, which means you came from Pennsylvania, whatever you have, we will match in as much as possible. And that remains for 30 school days. In that time, we're going to do our own updated testing and, Dallas ISD to see the appropriateness of the IEP as it relates to this student right now. However, if you come from another country, that wouldn't be an IEP as it's not under IDEA. So certainly schools are going to be as efficiently as possible. We don't want a kid to struggle. We don't want them to be rejected by their peers based on their unique needs of their disability. But we do need that testing done in totality by the school district.
Okay, so how can we get an update of the IEP goal progress when the school just defers to a report card time or annual IEP meeting? And also when the goal is updated during the report card time says nothing about how far along in terms of percentage of goal is being met. How do we address that?
So it's a requirement that the percentage is in there. You have to first make sure that the IEP goal is written correctly. Unfortunately, most IEP goals are very vanilla. And they're very much what you want the student to do. They often don't have SDI sitting inside of them. They don't have that specially designed instruction, right? What's the teacher going to do? It will say that Billy in 36 instructional weeks will read with fluency. I have no idea what that means, right? So at the end, we're certainly going to have at 70%, 4 out of 5 trials. You want to do as much stuff up front. I would call a meeting and say, what blank IEP data collection sheets do you use? If they don't have them, we certainly have blank sheets that we could provide you from the academy, but often they don't have those tools, but it's a requirement that progress is given to the parent. You can call a parent-teacher conference at any time to look at, in that moment, the success of his IEP.
Okay. What if we're having problems with stability of information asked for, refusing to take certain way diagnosis has been written by a professional who diagnosed and not stability of one program for my child's need, meaning they haven't been able to keep stable services for the child. And now the child is set another suspension and expulsion for 6. I'm not sure I understand that. 6 years. I'm not sure if it's a 6-year-old being considered. But anyway, how does that work?
Right. So whether we have stability, whether we have COVID, whether we have Harvey, whether we have extra teachers, the requirement to implement the IEP has never moved. It will never move. We certainly understand that there are literally a shortage of teachers at this moment, and we are certainly amenable to compensatory time to return the student to back where they would be had that it's an IDA violation to not implement their IEP. But certainly as it relates to, I think that you're talking about either suspension or some sort of disciplinary inaction. If a student has an IEP, we first, before we do a disciplinary action, we have an MDR, a manifestation determination review meeting to see if that discipline, that behavior was in fact a result of their disability. And then if it was, then we make an adjusted consequence for that student. We don't send them for 3 months to an out of district placement. But all of those things have to be done properly and procedurally with proper notification to the parents, 5 days written notice. This is not a rush thing. These are human beings. So we have to do them in order.
So one thing, and we are out of time. I knew it would go by fast. One person put in the chat box that IDEA manual gives you samples of letters and takes the parent through the process and getting information and complaints and kind of how to. So
Yeah.
There's a lot of good information there. That is good feedback for everyone.
And I just want to say TEA has a fantastic TEA dispute resolution handbook. I've trained on it. There's a 6-part series on Special Education Academy on YouTube. You can go watch them right now. On all of those filings, Texas, the TEA dispute resolution handbook answers every question as it relates to a state complaint all the way up to due process hearings. So that's a fantastic resource as well.
So very, very last, and I know we're out of time, but
Yeah.
This is a good one, and I think we've heard this before. What tips would you give a parent that keeps hitting a wall at the school for their student that was on a 504 previously and then transferred to a new school during COVID? Student has been off the 504 IEP plan at the new school for a year now, and she's hitting a brick wall and getting that fixed. You know what I say? I say call Karen Mayer Cunningham. But yeah, do you have any advice for that?
Do it in writing. And I think you do it in writing today. This is, January 18th. This is my formal request for my student to have a full evaluation in special education. Areas of suspected disability are attention and learning issues. I look forward to coming in and signing notice and consent. It is a business meeting. It is not personal. You have to do special education as a business. And I think sometimes we get too friendly with schools, and we love schools, teachers love parents, but this is business, and it's the business of educating your student so that he can have a successful future.
For sure. For sure. So thank you so much, Karen, I was trying to get back to your contact information, but the bottom line is you guys can contact Karen. Karen's whole business is doing what she does, this. So if you need help, there was a lot of thank yous. Somebody said they've already emailed you that they need your help. If you need help, reach out to Karen directly. You guys know how to get a hold of us. We'll send out an email with the recording, with all our contact information out there. So if you missed any of it, it's going to be in that email. Thank you so much for joining us today. And sorry we went 2 minutes over. That we usually don't do that. So thanks so much, everyone. And I hope you guys have a great afternoon.
Thank you for joining. I will stop the recording, and I will send the email later today. Thank you, Karen. Thank you,
Thank you, dear. Thank you all for having me.
Bye now.